Submission Query: A Ranger's Encounters. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am writing you as an old woman who has spent 3 decades of her life married to a park ranger in Michigan. My husband, who passed away 5 years ago, had an uncanny ability to spot things that were never supposed to be there. He would come home from his shifts in the park and tell me stories that would make me shiver in fear. He would always say that he was not allowed to talk about these things, but he had to tell someone, and that person was always me. I have never shared these stories with anyone else, but I feel that it's my duty to let them be known. I have a collection of stories in my head that my husband left behind, stories recounting his encounters with creatures that are not officially recognized by any authority. Some of these animals he described as having a surreal presence, while others were almost too human-like for comfort. Now, I believe these stories would fit perfectly in with the Scary Stories NYC format, and I'm eager to share them with your viewers. My husband's experiences while on the job have been officially classified as confidential, but I think he would have wanted them to be heard by more than just me. He would always say, "There are things that lurk in the forest that no one ever sees." I believe that these stories would be of great interest to your viewers, as they delve into the unexplained and the supernatural. As I said, I have an archive of these incidents locked away in my brain, but sooner or later I will pass on, and the stories will too. I am confident that these would be of great interest to your viewership. Thank you for considering my query. I look forward to hearing back from you soon. Sincerely, etc., etc. Story number 1. A Dogman encounter in Michigan. One particular story that my husband shared with me involved the time he thought he was trailing a thief through the woods at night. He was working the late shift and noticed someone moving about suspiciously. My husband decided to investigate and followed the shadow for a while. As he got closer, he realized that the figure was too tall to be any human, yet it was walking on 2 legs. He thought that maybe he stumbled upon someone wearing stilts, but he dismissed that notion when the figure disappeared into the bushes right in front of his very eyes. While he was still puzzling over what he had just seen, my husband suddenly heard a growling sound from behind him. When he turned around, he saw an enormous, dog-headed, and hairy beast man on 2 legs. He had never seen anything like that before, but it matched the descriptions of the legendary Michigan Dogman. After that night, my husband became a changed person. He was no longer the same carefree ranger who laughed off strange occurrences in the park. To his credit, he never let his fear show to the public, but he knew that he had encountered something beyond normal explanation. He made a point to tell me about his encounters, so I would always be aware of the hidden dangers in the woods. I believe that his stories can help shed light on the things that go bump in the night. I am hoping that Scary Stories NYC will be interested in publishing some more of these tales so that others can know what my husband saw. Story number 2. Werewolf in the Woods. Another story my late husband told me was about his encounter with a werewolf in those woods in Michigan. It was a cold winter night, and my husband was patrolling the park when he heard a loud howling sound coming from the darkness. Curious, he ventured off the path and into the trees, where he saw a massive creature with fur as black as night and eyes that shone like gold. The beast was clearly injured. Its paw was bleeding, and it appeared to be in pain. As he approached the animal, my husband suddenly realized that it was transforming from a wolf into a man. The creature shrank down, its fur receding, and when the change was finished, it was now an elderly native man who groaned in agony. The transformation startled my husband. He didn't know what to do or say, but the injured man called out to him, weakly, asking for help. My husband quickly proceeded to offer medical assistance by dressing up his wound and offering a ride to the hospital, but the man declined, insisting that he wished to stay in the woods. Over the next few nights, my husband returned to the spot where the man had transformed, meeting the old native there and bringing him supplies. His wound healed faster than it would have on a much younger man, and the stranger admitted to my husband that there were some advantages to being able to change one's form. Apparently it speeds up the metabolism, both in terms of hair growth and in terms of healing. And so even at his advanced age, the native chose to live in caves and off the land as an animal. Those two could talk for hours about the woods, the creatures that lived there, and the mysteries that they held. Both had a deep respect for that park, and as a result, they shared many common interests. The native man was a loner and rarely spoke to anyone, but over time, he and my husband became friends. They shared stories, secrets, and adventures, and I assure you my husband enjoyed getting to know this enigmatic stranger. Over the course of their friendship, my husband had gotten to know the man behind the werewolf and had formed a deep bond with him. The wolfman had always been able to keep his animal tendencies under control around my man, but one day, that all changed. It was a sunny afternoon, and my husband was sitting on the porch of the ranger station, enjoying the warmth and the company of a friendly cat that liked to visit him from time to time. As the cat rubbed against his leg, he saw the stranger's transformation beginning. The man who he had come to know as his friend, the werewolf, was suddenly consumed by rage and transformed into his fearsome creature form right in front of my husband's eyes. It was like something out of a horror movie, with the man's bones cracking and rearranging as fur sprouted from his skin, elongated claws extending from his hands and feet. His face twisted into something inhuman and savage, teeth bared as he let out a deafening roar. My husband was frozen for a moment, the shock of the sight before him leaving him unable to move. The good news is that the cat, sensing the danger, fled immediately, but the bad news is that the werewolf then turned his attention to my husband. His friend was wholly unrecognizable at that moment, consumed by a primal urge to kill. The werewolf lunged forward, and although my husband tried to reason with him, it was no use. The creature was beyond all logic. Without hesitation, he leaped into action, using his quick reflexes to dodge the werewolf's initial attack. The werewolf was powerful and ferocious, but my husband's trained techniques allowed him to keep his wits about him, always staying one step ahead of the creature's wild, unpredictable moves. He was able to anticipate and counter every attack, using the werewolf's own strength against it and managing eventually to subdue it. The beast would lunge. My husband would move away, belting the beast man from behind as he lost balance and slammed hard into a wall. My husband cracked a wooden chair over the werewolf's skull and barely even dazed him. It was only after a few agonizing minutes of that werewolf attacking and causing chaos that he finally calmed down and transformed back to his human form. My husband was left stunned, trying to comprehend what he had just lived through. From that day on, things were never quite the same between the two of them. Though my husband never turned his back on his friend, there was always a sense of tension and unease hanging between them. The incident made him more wary of the man behind the monster, and my husband knew he could never fully trust him in the same way again. That transformation was one of the most shocking things my husband had ever seen, and it became a reminder of just how fragile the line between humanity and savagery can be. The orb. That was not an orb. I remember the first time my husband told me about his sighting of a bizarre light orb moving through the Michigan woods at night. He had been working the late shift as usual, patrolling the park and investigating any suspicious activities. It was a quiet night until he noticed what looked like a group of people shining flashlights in the woods. Assuming it was illegal farmers trying to tend their crops at night, he went in to investigate. As he drew closer, my husband realized that the lights weren't from flashlights at all. They were coming from a strange orb, hovering 2 feet above the ground. What was even more unsettling than that was that the orb was making the sounds of heavy footsteps and raspy breathing. My husband was afraid to move closer, but he was also equally afraid to turn and run away. He stood there for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of what he was seeing and hearing. The orb moved through the woods, bobbing and weaving like a drunk teenager trying to walk a straight line. And the strangest part of it all was that it seemed to be following him. As the orb closed in, my husband said he could feel a palpable fear washing over him. He assumed it was the farmers, and that they were probably armed and dangerous. But when the orb got within just a few feet, it made an abrupt turn and disappeared into the darkness. A few months after he saw that light orb, my husband was on his usual patrol when he saw it again. This time the orb was moving in an erratic pattern, zigzagging through the woods. As he approached it cautiously, the orb started to morph and take on a human-like form. To my husband's amazement, a huge, 15-foot-tall Bigfoot stood before him. The creature's stench was unbearable, and my husband described it as smelling like rotting meat. But what was stranger still was that the Bigfoot communicated with him telepathically, telling my husband a story about being a fallen angel from a formerly divine lineage. The Bigfoot explained in his mind that he and his people were once part of the angelic realm, but were cast out for not following divine will. My husband said that the Bigfoot's voice was as clear as if it were speaking out loud, and that he could feel the creature's emotions and his thoughts as it spoke. The Sasquatch went on to explain telepathically that it had been wandering the woods ever since it was cast out. It said that it was searching for a way to regain its former grace and become an angel once again. My husband was awestruck by the creature's story and could hardly believe what he was hearing. After this encounter, my husband's perspective on the supernatural changed. He no longer saw these beings as hoaxes or hallucinations or urban legends, but as living, sentient beings with their own histories and belief systems. In sharing his story with me, my husband hoped that he could make sense of and find meaning in these encounters. He never forgot what he experienced in the woods, and neither will I. The Hodag. My late husband always had a way of telling stories that would capture my attention and send shivers down my spine. One particular tale he told me that has always stuck with me was about the time he had encountered a Hodag deep in the woods. If you don't already know, a Hodag is a mythical creature that is supposed to exist in the town of Rhinelander, Wisconsin. According to legend, the Hodag was discovered by a local logger named Eugene Shepard in the late 1800s. Shepard claimed that he had captured a fearsome creature with horns, a green reptilian body, and razor-sharp teeth that roamed the nearby forests. The story of the Hodag quickly became a sensation, and Shepard began exhibiting the stuffed body of the beast at local fairs and festivals. Despite some doubters calling him a hoax, the Hodag himself remained a source of pride and fascination for the people of Rhinelander. The town adopted the creature as its official mascot, and it has become an important part of local lore and culture. The Hodag is celebrated every summer during a festival that includes live music, food vendors, and a parade featuring the Hodag himself. But what my husband encountered was not some friendly mascot. He described the creature as being a giant lumbering beast, similar in size to a buffalo, but with the ferocity of a lion. My husband had been out on patrol when he saw the creature feasting on berries from a bush, and he couldn't resist getting a closer look. As my ranger husband crept toward the monster, the Hodag suddenly caught sight of him and let out a terrifying roar. My husband turned to run, but the animal was faster than he had anticipated and was hot on his heels. He knew that he had no chance of outrunning that giant four-legged creature, so he sought refuge in some tall grass behind a fallen log to the side of the path. The Hodag charged right past him, snarling and snapping, searching for its prey. My husband lay there in the grass, frozen in terror, for what felt like an eternity, until he was certain that the Hodag had finally moved on. He returned home that night, shaken but alive, having experienced a brush with one of the most feared creatures of the Midwestern wilderness. I could picture the Hodag in my mind, with its giant, gnarled horns and vicious teeth, and I couldn't help but feel grateful that my husband had survived such a dangerous encounter. Although he's no longer with me, I find comfort in remembering the stories he told and the adventures he had, even if they were sometimes terrifying. It reminds me of the raw beauty and untamed wildness of the woods, and it makes me long for the days when he was still here to explore it with me. Hey, it's your old pal Bigfoot with a hot new offer for you for summer. Snag these badass new Scary Stories NYC sandal slide things modeled here by your old pal Bigfoot, and take 25% of the price off by using the checkout code YTShopping25. It's a sweet deal for both of us because YouTube is covering that 25% discount. The link should be in the description, and if you're on YouTube and it's May or June of 2023, then you might see an image of it right under this video. It comes in 5 different colors, so use them to express yourselves. The Strange Light and Missing Time. One time my husband told me a truly strange tale, one that really gave me the shivers from head to toe. It seems he was out on patrol, and he heard some kind of a disturbance in the woods. He walked in there and found a young couple in a clearing having a big argument and shouting a lot. When he asked them what was the problem, they told him a very crazy story. The two of them had planned a romantic evening, setting up their tent in the woods and building themselves a campfire in a pit surrounded by rocks to keep the fire from spreading. The girl pointed out a bright light up in the sky to her boyfriend, which then seemed to become multiple bright lights. They thought it was a police helicopter when it shone a spotlight down onto them, lighting them up blindingly bright. They shouted up at what they thought was a copter until they began to feel themselves being lifted up off the ground and flying upward into the air. Soon they found themselves in an area that they called a hospital, but the doctors and nurses were not human, nor were they your typical gray alien either. They reported being poked and prodded by a bunch of green men who seemed like reptiles and human at the same time. There were security guards stationed at the 2 doors, and those guards looked like upright standing canine creatures. Bipedal dogmen, in other words. The two kept collapsing into arguments, and they were both embarrassed because they were wearing each other's clothing. Hers was torn, being too small to fit on the young man, while his larger clothing hung loosely over his girlfriend's tiny frame. They both insisted they did not choose to be dressed like that. They claimed they woke up on the ground outside of their tent, wearing each other's clothing put on inside out. The campfire was already out and smoldering, so they must have been gone for some time before waking up. Neither of them appeared to be intoxicated, but both appeared to be in some kind of a state of shock. My husband helped them gather their things and walked them to where they had parked their vehicle. Both seemed well enough to drive themselves to the hospital, which is presumably where they went next. Well, that's a sampling of the kinds of stories he used to tell, and a couple of his buddies had some wild tales too. Of course, none of these went into the official record because these guys all wanted to keep their jobs. Let me know if you'd like to hear any more weird ones, and I'll see what I can remember. No matter where you go on the World Wide Web, you won't find anyone nicer than Deb. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer, Deborah Ariolo, for making this episode possible. Deborah is a member of our PayPal subscribers club, which means she gets to see 4 new secret uncensored stories each month, including the one we just put out yesterday, which has to do with a subject that I'm not allowed to talk about here. If you want to find out more about it, then you can join our club too. And here to explain how is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.